Well, I'm really glad to be here with you today from Washington, D.C. I am director of the Wireless and Electromagnetic Field Program at Environmental Health Sciences, a scientific nonprofit. And I have been working on environmental health policy related to the issue of cell phones and wireless for over a decade. I've co-authored several publications on wireless and children's health, and especially on best practice strategies to mitigate risks to prevent health harm. And I also helped to organize a major EMF medical conference on this issue in 2019. It was the first of its kind, designed to train medical professionals, doctors, and I love talking about cell phone and cell tower company advertising. Now, it was not so long ago when we were told that physicians thought Lucky cigarettes were less irritating, and pregnant women were told that smoking actually was good because it lowered the birth weight of the babies. It's a win-win situation, easy labor and a slim baby.
It's true. The babies born from women who smoke are smaller, but they're just as healthy as the babies born from women who do not smoke.
What about the higher
And
rate
some
of
women would
deaths?
prefer having smaller babies.
So all cell phones and wireless devices emit radio frequency radiation. Yes, it is non-ionizing. No, it's not the same as an X-ray or an atomic bomb, but that doesn't mean it's safe. I'm going to play you a quick clip of Frank Clegg, former Microsoft Canada president, discussing the issue.
I've spent over 40 years in the technology industry. My most recent position was president of Microsoft Canada, and I've seen the tremendous benefit technology can provide. I've also seen the potential harm if technology is not used correctly. In my opinion, our current implementation of wireless technology is not safe. I've met with experts from institutions such as Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and the University of Toronto, and I've met with an expert advisor to the World Health Organization and one of the lead scientific writers for Al Gore's team that won the Nobel Prize. Over 250 scientists from 40 countries signed a formal appeal to the World Health Organization and the United Nations member states expressing their concern over the harmful effects of wireless technology, and added an additional appeal for the effects of 5G, especially the effects on children. Hundreds of peer-reviewed scientific papers have been published demonstrating harm to humans and the environment. This evidence includes increase in cancer, sperm damage, reproductive harms, memory and learning deficits, especially in children, and damage to our DNA, nervous systems, and the cells in our bodies.
In 2015, there was a report out of Harvard called Captured Agency, which compared the tactics of the wireless industry to big tobacco. They detailed how wireless companies were using the same playbook to create doubt. And they followed the money. They showed how heavy lobbying has resulted in industry-friendly regulation or deregulation, really, with the FCC exemplifying the concept of regulatory capture, the revolving door between industry and government. Wireless companies have been able to market this illusion that wireless is safe by using their resources to impact the media, science, government, and the law. There is a massive multimedia public relations campaign, very well funded, which asserts that wireless is safe and obscures the reality that wireless devices actually emit a kind of a radiation, one that many scientists are studying for health impacts. Companies have been able to control the science by funding studies, which more often than not don't show an effect. They also attack or war game the science that does show effects, suppressing the evidence and discrediting researchers. They have poured money into lobbying efforts at the local, state, and federal level, stalling efforts towards government accountability and transparency, and they've actually been rather successful in deregulating so that we can have cell towers popping up all over the nation here in the United States without people being able to stop it. And a key piece to the strategy that the wireless industry uses is aggressive legal action. The threat of lawsuits if you try to stop a cell tower going up, or litigation against every and all effort to implement protective laws and policies like no cell towers on schools, or let's inform the public that cell phones actually emit a kind of a radiation. We are surrounded by ads about how we love our phones. Loving phones is easy, and so many people do. But this love, but this love is to a machine, not a person. It is reliance, dependence, addiction by design, intentionally engineered to capture and retain our attention and to keep us online for as long as possible. Companies use psychological principles, behavioral science, and data-driven algorithms to maximize our engagement and keep us online forever, so we never turn off the phone. I mean, companies are telling us to binge, to spend hours and hours watching unlimited movies, even when you're in the pool. And then they sell us products like Family Mode so that we might take a break from the device, even though they created the problem of addiction in the first place. They say that we will have connection, smiles, laughter, when in fact, loneliness, anxiety, and depression are soaring since the advent of the smartphone and social media. But I'm not going to focus on mental health today. I'm going to focus on the radiation emitted from cell phones and wireless devices. Because if they were honest, cell phone commercials might look like this. They would share an unseen reality, and that is that cell phones and wireless devices emit radio frequency radiation, which is absorbed into our bodies. What you're seeing here is computer modeling of cell phone radiation into the brain of an adult compared to a child by an engineering team from federal universities in Brazil. Yellow is the highest level. It goes to orange, red, purple, and blue. And this image is from a 2018 study that looked at a cell phone to the ear as well as in virtual reality positions, like with the phone in front of your eyes. And they found, as many earlier studies have, that children had higher rates of absorption into their brain and body tissues, tenfold greater into the cerebellum and the bone marrow of the skull, 30-fold greater into the hippocampus, and 2 to almost 5-fold higher into the eyes. Children have proportionately higher absorption as compared to adults. This is another simulation from a paper looking at Wi-Fi from a laptop into the head of a child with a tablet at just under 6 inches from the eyes. And yet we are told things will be merry and bright. We are learning and playing together. We are not shown how the radiation from a laptop enters into our bodies. This is research looking at the exposure from Wi-Fi radiation from a laptop. And as it gets closer to the body, the levels get more intense, right close to where the antenna is. And yet they tell us we will get more enjoyment. And there it is, a laptop on the lap. They're not telling us that that laptop is actually exposing us to radiation. The best thing you can do with a laptop is have it off your lap. Put it on a table. We are relentlessly being marketed phones and tablets and Wi-Fi without being informed of the radiation exposure. This image is from a paper by researchers of the International Commission on the Biological Effects of Electromagnetic Fields, where they looked at a cell phone antenna at 0, 2, and 6 centimeters from the head and found that, as expected, as you increased your distance, you had decreased exposure to your head and brain. This is why speakerphone is really recommended. Keep the phone away from your head. Now, this paper reviewed engineering solutions, ways that software and hardware changes could be made to cell phones, which could drastically reduce RF radiation exposure. There are so many solutions to make technology safer, and it is only a matter of time before industry starts to compete on safety. Now, some scientists say that wireless is just plain safe. The International Commission for Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, ICNIRP for short, is an invite-only club with long-standing industry ties that is accountable to no one. There is no one checking their work. Now, you know in marketing when you start your business that your name is everything. And by calling them the International Commission for Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, you would think that, of course, they know what they're talking about. And indeed, they have published a lot in the field. They have so much long history of being funded by industry going back for many years. In fact, ICNIRP was founded by an industry-funded scientist.
ICNIRP has been working with the World Health Organization for many, many years. And when I started up the EMF project WHO, the prime purpose of that was to identify any effects that could be established at levels below the ICNIRP limits. And so we promoted research, and there's some $200 to $300 million worth of research has gone in the last 10 to 15 years to try and find if there are any effects below the ICNIRP safety limits. And after all of this work, we still haven't found any effect. And this is why ICNIRP could quite confidently say that from the reviews of the literature, there are no effects in the literature that would mean that they should be lowering the limits.
You know, creating blue ribbon panels or groups of experts is a well-known tactic of companies who have a product under suspicion for health effects. They did it with tobacco, with plastics, with pesticides, and they're doing it with wireless now. So here's a video by ICNIRP scientists who also happen to be scientists of Australian academic institutions researching the issue of wireless radio frequency. This video was put forward by the Australian government's Department of Telecommunications. And I note that the laboratory you see here is in fact financed heavily by Telstra. That's the Australian telecommunications company. Andrew Wood, who is in this video, has 2 Telstra employees that are paid by Telstra, the telecommunications company, and work in his lab for free. And Rodney Croft, who you also see here, has a history of industry funding.
So 5G, of course, is just a name. It doesn't have a meaning physically. So what we have is a whole lot of research that's explored how the electromagnetic energy works and whether or not it can in fact hurt people. This research has been going on for many years, and that's what we rely on when we look to see whether 5G is going to cause a problem or not. There's been a great deal of research looking at the effects of EME on humans. Of course, there's been a lot of work that supplements this using animals and various other methodologies. But certainly in humans, science has tried to identify problems. Because there have been claims by some people of problems, science has tried to verify these claims, but so far it just hasn't managed to do so.
Similar to wildlife in any other country, then I think there's a fair amount of information that can be applied to evaluate the potential harm, and I believe that there isn't any substantive evidence of there being any harm.
The country's major research centre into any possible link is the Australian Centre for RF Bioeffects Research, run by Rodney Croft. Should we be worried about this?
No, there really has been a lot of research done to date, and the research has very clearly shown that there aren't any effects.
The ACRBR boasts some of our most experienced scientists, but as we'll see, it also has strong links with the industry. In New York, Louis Slessin runs Microwave News, which has tracked the mobile story for over 20 years. He's become highly critical of those he sees downplaying a link to cancer.
The people who are not inside, the insiders, if you will, are much more willing to speak out and say, we've got to be careful. the resistance comes from the people in the field, the so-called expert groups, those who make their bread and butter out of this, and they're saying no, there's nothing to worry about, which is what they've been saying for 20 years.
The ACRBR was created with Telstra funding and Telstra lab equipment. Rodney Croft denies that the industry buys influence.
You have Telstra researchers working through the ACRBR. Your board consists of at least one director who's a Telstra board member, who's a former chief government scientist and a former head of the CSIRO. Can you see the potential for some heavy influence there?
It would still be very difficult.
Now, most people are unaware that hidden deep within the settings of your cell phone, there is a fine print warning that states the phone should be a specific distance away from your body. So, for example, for the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 3 5G, it's 1.5 centimeters. In the instructions of the phone, they say body-worn SAR testing has been carried out at a separation distance of 1.5 centimeter. To meet this RF exposure guideline, during body-worn operation, the device should be positioned at least this distance away from the body. What they are saying is that the phone should be used not touching the body, but at this distance from the body. Now, the iPhone 16 says this distance is 5 millimeters. Every cell phone has fine print user instructions from the manufacturer that are about this radiation issue, and they say there should be a separation distance. And that's because when a phone is placed in close contact with your body, the radiation exposure could be at levels that exceed government recommended limits. Before a phone is brought to market, it actually does need to be tested for how much radiation is coming out of it and how much might be going into your body. Many people assume that these tests are conducted the way that people use devices, like in positions touching the body. However, phones are not required to be tested touching the body, at least not in the US, not in the UK, or anywhere around the world. The image you see on the left is the test dummy that phones are tested on. And phones are held up to this, but not directly touching it. You can think of it like the test dummies that are used for car crashes, except the body phantom and the way we test has not been updated for over 20 years. So there's this body phantom, a big hard shell filled with a thick fluid, supposedly to replicate our body tissues. Of course, it does not replicate our body tissues. And the phone is placed up to it, but not touching the phantom. And you have up to 5 millimeters away from the body in Europe, and that only recently changed. But in the United States, you can still actually test phones up to 25 millimeters away from the body. And companies really do not want to be testing phones at 0 millimeters, because if they did, they'd have to change software and hardware and make the phones so that they emitted less radiation into the body. I'm going to play you a short clip from a Canadian CBC investigation.
So first you're going to do it with the distance?
Yeah.
Chief Engineer Jay Moulton is helping us find out.
First measurement we'll do is with a 5 millimeter gap, which this is a 5 millimeter distance.
Because that's how they test it? With a 5 millimeter distance?
This is how Apple did the original test.
Apple tests closer than many at 5 millimeters. LG does their testing at 10. Samsung tests this phone at 15. That's a full 1.5 centimeters away from the body, the maximum allowed. Results from the first test, the way manufacturers do it, are in. All 3 phones come within the safety limit. Okay, so that's no surprise to you?
That's no surprise.
Time to start our test the way most of us carry them.
We'll roll this thing all the way up until it touches and has a 0 gap.
Have you ever done that test for anyone else before?
No, I haven't, because it's not a requirement, so the manufacturers don't do it very often.
So the tests are all done?
Tests are all finished.
And?
The number exceeded the limit. It went up significantly with each one of the phones.
That's right. The phones exceeded the safety limit when they were moved right against the body. The radiation absorbed increased 3 to 4 times.
Now, the French government has a rather robust post-market surveillance program for the radiation testing, not for health effects, by the way, that has tested hundreds of phones since 2012. And when they first released test results, they found the majority exceeded government regulations, some by up to 3 times the limit when the phone was tested at body contact. In 2019, the French National Agency for Food, Environment, and Occupational Health and Safety, ANSYS, issued a report recommending that the cell phone SAR measurements be at 0 millimeter from the body, because that distance would better reflect the actual way we use phones: in a pocket, against the skin, in our bra, pressed to the chest when we text, resting on our stomach, pressed to your abdomen. French ministers then issued a joint press release calling for this update and for stronger government consumer information. So they actually updated what you would get when you bought a phone so that there were instructions saying you should use a speakerphone, you should limit children's use, keep the phone away from the belly of pregnant women and from the lower abdomen of adolescents. Now, in the meantime, the French government is still testing phones. They found that over 58 phones and devices have exceeded limits even with that separation distance. And they've had to be software updated or removed from the market because of the excessive radiation. Dr. Marc Arazi, a French doctor, coined the situation as Phone Gate, and he started a nonprofit dedicated to addressing the inadequate way phones are tested and really keeping the French government accountable. In 2020, France filed a formal objection to the EU's regulations, saying the standards needed to be further revised so that phones were tested at 0 millimeters from the body, not just 5 millimeters, because every millimeter really makes a difference with cell phone radiation. It's really intense coming out of the antenna of the phone. So you really want to keep it as far away from your body as possible. Keep it on the table, not in your pants. Now, this is not new information because published studies going back decades have documented this reality. It's just based on physics. The closer the device, the more your exposure. A 2002 study tested phones as if they were placed in a shirt pocket next to the skin and measured the exposure levels, which were 2 to 7 times higher compared to tests that use the manufacturer's separation distance. And Professor Om Gandhi, who did that study many years later, published research covering the French government cell phone test measurements, converting them to the way the US tests phones, and found that the radiation levels could exceed US FCC's radiation limits up to 11 times US government limits. And yet clothes are designed for phones to be tucked in the pockets. Pockets have been made bigger in order to accommodate these big cell phones people have. Women put cell phones in their bras, and there are published case reports documenting young women with no genetic history getting an unusual type of multifocal breast cancer directly underneath where they stored their phone in their bra. This is a case report that was published, and there's also a case control study finding excessive smartphone use significantly increased the risk of breast cancer, particularly for people who were what they called addicted to the cell phones, used it quite heavily, and those who had a close distance between their breasts and the smartphone, and also those who use a smartphone before bedtime. The nonprofit organization Consumers for Safe Cell Phones has a video series of women talking about their breast cancers that they developed after they had that cell phone in their bra.
The research is unequivocal that the radiation from your cell phone can be carcinogenic, particularly when it's held up to or on your skin. And a lot of people don't know that. So after my diagnosis, I underwent a lumpectomy and they did a biopsy, and I found out that I had estrogen positive breast cancer. The radiation oncologist, he said, so I recommend that you get a double mastectomy. We do, in fact, know how dangerous these devices are. There's just a concerted effort to keep that from the public.
My tumor is the size of my cell phone. It is 11 centimeters, 4 inches, exactly where I used to tuck it in my bra. It's just too obvious. There's no history of breast cancer in my family. There just is no other explanation.
And so your oncologist?
Oh, she absolutely agreed.
And it's not just breast cancer. This is a case report of a tumor developing in the body right near where a 40-year-old man kept his cell phone on his left thigh. And yet the companies are not informing us that we need to keep the phones away from our bodies.
When I see a problem, I am going to fix it. America's got a serious problem, so I'm going to get it off my chest. 5G phones, trapped on limited 5G networks. But you can make a difference. If you join T-Mobile, these phones will be able to shine their brightest, like me. I have my own theme park. T-Mobile, do it for the phones. Hey, Molly.
How can I help these phones?
You got a voice. Use it.
Let's do it for the phone. They do so much for you. When they're out there all alone, there's something we can do. So don't settle for less. You deserve the best. More coverage goes to go. T-Mobile. Look at these maps, they don't lie. More coverage for less than the other guys. Look at these maps, they don't lie. And faster speeds nationwide. Let's do it for the phones. They do so much for you.
In 2011, wireless radiation, radio frequency radiation, was classified as a class 2B carcinogen, which means that they consider it possibly carcinogenic to humans based on studies that found an increased risk for glioma. That is a malignant type of brain cancer. And there have been several other studies since 2011 linking people's increased cell phone use with increased brain cancer and other kinds of tumors.
This is a pretty powerful image. This is my brain on a cell phone, okay? So if you can see there's a baseball-sized tumor and right here, right exactly where the antenna goes, and went for 20 years. So if anyone has any doubt, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you'll get one of these if you put a cell phone up to your brain long enough. It's just that simple. That's what I'm learning here. And I was an early adopter of cell phones because I was in commercial real estate, and I started in 1988, right when they came out. And I was real proud of the fact that I had a cell phone, and didn't realize I was actually a guinea pig, as well as the rest of society is right now. And I didn't sign an acknowledgement of that, nor has anyone else who's used a cell phone, that we're all guinea pigs, basically, in society. And this is probably the biggest it is the biggest human experiment in the history of the world, because it's never been possible to have so many people all doing the same thing across the...
But of course, association is not causation, and that is why scientists look at animal studies where you can carefully control the housing, the food, so that everything's the same. The only thing that's different is one group has exposure to something and the other group does not. So the US government National Toxicology Program ran a $30 million massive study on animals. They exposed rats and mice to cell phone radio frequency radiation. And what they found was clear evidence of cancer in the male rats. They found increased malignant schwannomas, as well as a type of brain cancer, gliomas in the brain. And they also found an increase in DNA damage. Radio frequency radiation was linked to significant increases in DNA damage in the frontal cortex of the brain in male mice, the blood cells of female mice, and the hippocampus of male rats. And yet, we are told that we can live life on 4G, and look at that advertisement with a cell phone to her head. And now there are many scientists who say that if the World Health Organization, International Agency for Research on Cancer, were to meet again and review all of the science, they would conclude that radio frequency radiation was a probable or proven human carcinogen due to the findings in both humans and animals. Now, this comes as no surprise to many scientists who have been working on this issue for decades. DNA damage was found in animal research performed decades ago in the mid 90s by professors Henry Lai and N.P. Singh. And what you're seeing here is a microwave news article of a leaked memo between the wireless company Motorola and its public relations firm. And the memo revealed a strategy to, quote, war game, end quote, Dr. Lai's findings, to discredit the research and downplay the significance of the findings. The wireless company lined up scientists to publicly dispute the findings and attack Dr. Lai's credibility. Now, notably, the PR firm Burson Marsteller is also one of the PR firms which has long consulted with the tobacco industry, and at that time, it was also organizing a response to an EPA report which had identified secondhand smoke as a human carcinogen. The firm led the way in astroturfing. They created a smokers' rights group called the National Smokers Alliance to oppose anti-smoking legislation that was moving forward. Now, here's Dr. Henry Lai speaking about his experience.
And actually, there was an internal memo that leaked out from Motorola, and the memo basically tried to find some way to discredit our results.
As well as other members of the industry, I understand that someone contacted both NIH and perhaps someone else contacted the University of Washington president at the time, trying to get you fired for that?
Yeah, that's true, yes. Mm-hmm.
So I have to imagine that was, that must have been somewhat surprising to you.
Yes, actually, that was actually very stressful too, and it was surprising because we're scientists and we're never involved in all this kind of political and so it's kind of a very stressful time after we published the paper.
There are, in fact, many stories like this in the history of cell phone and electromagnetic field research. And here you see scientist Jerry Phillips also talking about his experience with Motorola.
I moved to California, Southern California. The 60 hertz work that we did was supported by a contract from the Department of Energy. The radio frequency radiation work that we did was supported by Motorola. The relationship was really very cordial and very stress-free, but only up until we started generating data. These folks were very, very upset and began to talk about how are they going to handle this, what sort of spin can we put on this, what can we expect from this, and from that point on the relationship changed. What we saw was that Motorola began to exert more and more control over the work, telling us what to do, telling us how to write abstracts, what to say in the abstracts, what to say in the papers. I said, how to do the work. No, don't do this. Yes, do it this way. This was unacceptable. I had completed our study of DNA damage, and I submitted the final report to Motorola, and I got a call from Mays Swycord at Motorola. Now, Mays is the former head of the Center for, CDRA, Center for Devices and Radiological Health at the FDA, and he left the FDA and went to work for Motorola. Keep that connection in mind. That's interesting. He also handpicked his successor at the FDA. Anyhow, Mays didn't like the work. Then there was another phone call. Point is, I kept getting nothing from these people. They simply weren't willing to accept my interpretation of my study, my evaluation of my study, my knowledge of science at that point, and tried to urge me not to publish the study. They didn't tell me not to. They just said, no, this isn't ready for publication. And they wanted me to do more work. I stopped taking calls from them, and I went ahead and published the study. It came out in 1998, and I wanted nothing more to do with any Motorola-related work. I wasn't going to put up with that kind of control. I wouldn't put up with that attitude.
Now, there are several analyses that have looked at industry-funded studies versus independently funded studies, and they have found that industry-funded studies in the issue of electromagnetic fields and wireless are significantly less likely to report adverse effects. Higher quality independent studies tended to show a stronger link between long-term cell phone use and brain tumors, whereas studies with industry funding reported no significant associations. When it comes to millimeter waves used in 5G, industry-funded studies also report lower effect outcomes compared to government-funded or institution-based studies. This also applies to other types of non-ionizing radiation. Dr. David Carpenter, Harvard-trained, who has worked on this issue for decades, did a review analyzing studies on the impact of power line non-ionizing electromagnetic fields, and he found that government independent studies consistently found links with childhood leukemia, whereas industry-sponsored studies largely do not. And he has researched not only power line electromagnetic fields, but also cell tower and wireless radiation. Now, even if you follow manufacturers' instructions for a distance, the 5 millimeter, 10 or 15 millimeters between the phone and your body, that does not ensure safety, because these limits are unchanged since the 90s, and they are designed only to protect against overheating impacts, not biological impacts. They're also based on research from the 70s and 80s using a few rats, mice, and small monkeys, which they heated up for under an hour. And when the small animals stopped pressing a lever they'd been trained to press for food, the scientists said, oh, that's it. That's the level that's harmful. Look, they're not pressing the lever for food. Under an hour of exposure, a very high level. That is how our limits were set.
The number of animals that were studied in these particular groups was very small. There were 8 rats and 5 monkeys. And this is the basis for the exposure limits that are being used throughout the world. The studies were 40-minute or 60-minute durations. These are acute exposures. They don't tell you anything about long-term exposure. And they're only a single endpoint, this behavioral response to pressing a lever. This does not meet any reasonable standard for characterizing the potential of a hazardous agent.
These limits were not designed to protect for biological effects, long-term exposures, real-world exposures from cumulative sources, children's unique vulnerability. Their brain is still developing, so they are far more sensitive to exposure compared to adults whose brain is already formed. Or impacts to wildlife, plants, and trees, of which there is copious research. And in fact, hundreds of scientists who have studied the issue are calling for urgent action to reduce public exposure. You can go to the EMF Scientist Appeal, the 5G Appeal, the Physicians' Health Initiative for Radiation and Environment in the UK, where you are. Go to the website of ICBE-EMF, the International Commission on the Biological Effects of Electromagnetic Fields. Or Dr. Joel Moskowitz at the University of California, Berkeley. He lists tons of studies. In fact, he has Dr. Henry Lei's analysis that found the majority of studies on important endpoints such as genetic, neurological, oxidative stress have found adverse effects. So wireless radiation might be invisible, but it is not benign. Now, a few years ago, the U.S. government decided it did not need to change its 1996 limits, even though there was an open proceeding where scientists and members of the public and even policymakers had submitted thousands of documents, scientific evidence saying that the limits needed to be updated to reflect the latest research. Now, when the U.S. government made its decision not to update its outdated and completely indefensible limits that were based only on heat, I and several others decided to sue the federal government. Now, at the time, I was executive director of Environmental Health Trust, and I also am a petitioner in the case. So we sued. We had oral arguments, a court hearing, and many briefs going back and forth, and we won. Now, we argued that the government could not just keep these outdated limits because they hadn't even shown that they had properly reviewed all of the scientific evidence that they had been sent. And in August of 2021, after reviewing 10,000 pages of evidence, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, which is, by the way, the second highest court in the land right under the Supreme Court, ruled that the FCC's 2019 decision not to update its 1996 wireless radiation limits was arbitrary and capricious. And the court found that the FCC had not provided evidence of properly examining the issues of long-term exposure, children's vulnerability, because of course their brains are more sensitive. They haven't fully developed. The way that the cell phone test uses a separation distance, the impacts to the developing brain and reproductive system, which are non-cancer impacts. And they also said that the FCC had completely failed to address environmental effects, impacts to wildlife, birds, trees, bees. And the court ordered the FCC to explain how its limits were protective for these issues, which it had ignored. And guess what? The FCC has not responded, and it has been 3 years. Now, if government limits are so safe, why can't the government explain how they are safe? Now, in the United States, there have been several efforts to inform the public. In 2010, the city of San Francisco adopted point-of-sale cell phone radiation labeling legislation, which included the creation of posters and fact sheets advising people on why and how to minimize the radiation exposure from their cell phone. But as soon as it passed, the Cellular Telecommunications and Internet Association, called the CTIA wireless industry, immediately sued the city. They claimed that the San Francisco ordinance violated the free speech rights of the companies, as guaranteed by the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, because the ordinance was forcing retailers to spread a message that they disagreed with. And after a 3-year court battle, the city of San Francisco agreed to disband the law in exchange for a waiver of the industry's legal fees. And this is part of the aggressive legal tactics of industry. A few years later, in 2015, the city of Berkeley, California, unanimously passed an ordinance drafted to withstand the anticipated legal challenge by the industry. They had a label that did not talk about health effects, but instead it just informed consumers about the fine print instructions, stating, if you carry or use your phone in a pants pocket or shorts pocket or tucked in a bra when the phone is on and connected to a wireless network, you may exceed the federal guidelines for exposure to radio frequency radiation. The potential risk is greater for children. Refer to the instructions in your phone or user manual for information about how to use your phone safely. Well, the CTIA wireless industry immediately sued, and the statement on children's risk was removed amidst the legal wrangling. The ordinance withstood several court challenges, including the industry's attempt to bring the case to the U.S. Supreme Court. However, the implementation of the law was ultimately halted by a judge in 2020 after the FCC submitted a filing to the court saying that additional warnings at this point of sale may create an erroneous perception that RF emissions from FCC certified phones are unsafe. But let's hop back in time for a second, because I've been investigating the federal government and the issue of cell phones for years. And here's something I found out. Years ago, when the Apple iPhone 3 came out, Apple filed to the FCC saying, iPhone's SAR measurement, meaning the cell phone radiation specific absorption rate measurements, may exceed the FCC exposure guidelines for body-worn operation if positioned less than 15 millimeters, that's 5/8 of an inch, from the body, e.g. when carrying the iPhone in your pocket. And they clearly stated, when using iPhone near your body for voice calls or for wireless data transmission over a cellular network, keep iPhone at least 15 millimeters, 5/8 of an inch, away from your body. In fact, every iPhone after that had a similar statement at first. So in 2015, the Apple iPhone 6 said, this cell phone was tested near the body with a 5 millimeter separation, and it had the phrase, in the instructions. Carry iPhone at least 5 millimeters away from your body to ensure exposure levels remain at or below as tested levels. Now that's pretty clear. Now, of course, most people didn't even know to look in their manual or to read the instructions, but in fact, this instruction was there. But by November 2017, that text was removed. Now, it was online before, and then they changed it on the online website. You can still find it in the Wayback Machine that archives web pages, which is a fantastic tool, by the way. And the same thing happened for the iPhone 7. The straightforward instructions, which was posted online, was removed by the fall of 2017. They removed the statement, carry iPhone at least 5 millimeters away from your body to ensure exposure levels remain at or below the as-tested levels. If you want to find the fine print warning on your cell phone, if you have an Apple iPhone, go to Settings General About Legal RF Exposure. Motorola, Samsung, and LG have sites as well. I have filed over 300 Freedom of Information requests with various U.S. federal agencies, the FDA, the CDC, NIH, EPA, and the FCC. Among my findings, one of the most egregious is that the FCC itself tested cell phones for radiation exposure, and they found that phones exceeded RF exposure limits when tested close to the body at 2 millimeters, such as in a tight pants pocket. And yet the FCC kept these test results secret for years. The FCC withheld this information from the public, the media, and even from court cases it was involved in that centered on the issue. So here's the story. In 2019, the Chicago Tribune published an investigative report revealing that cell phones tested in an FCC-certified lab exceeded the U.S. government radiofrequency radiation human exposure limits by several fold, especially when they were tested at 2 millimeters from the body. Now, in response, the FCC announced that it would conduct its own tests, which is a rarity because they have no post-market surveillance data publicly available that I know of. Then, a few months later, in December of 2019, the agency released a report stating that its laboratory testing showed all phones complied with U.S. regulations. Sounds great. The Chicago Tribune must have made a mistake, right? So in turn, the Chicago Tribune published a follow-up story noting that the FCC had found no evidence of any FCC rules regarding safety limits. And the Tribune story ended by stating, the FCC's recent study did not test phones at 2 millimeters distance. Now, my Freedom of Information requests uncovered that the FCC had, in fact, tested phones at a 2 millimeter distance from the body phantom, contrary to what was publicly presented by the agency itself in their report. Because I had filed for all cell phone SAR test data, I was sent internal laboratory test findings that showed several cell phone models had exceeded the FCC's own safety limits, with some of the radiation measurements up to 3 times higher than legal limits when tested close to the body at 2 millimeters, the pocket test. Now, the spreadsheet that the FCC sent me containing the 2 millimeter cell phone radiation test was labeled confidential. Yes, they said confidential in red. Accompanying the spreadsheet was a letter in which it stated, we observed that at 2 millimeter separation distance, the FCC's radio frequency RF exposure limits were exceeded, but then they downplayed it, saying that the 2 millimeter separation distance test results are inconsistent with FCC practice and are misleading because they reflect extreme conditions. So the very agency responsible for ensuring compliance withheld its own laboratory studies showing that RF exposure could exceed human exposure limits. And not only that, but the FCC had failed to disclose these findings in at least 3 major legal proceedings directly related to cell phone radiation safety. The FCC didn't include the 2 millimeter tests In their own court filings in the Apple versus Cohen case, in which the plaintiffs alleged that cell phones emitted excessive radiation and that the manufacturers were engaged in deceptive marketing, showing the phones close to the body. The FCC omitted the 2 mm test from its filings in the Berkeley versus CTIA case, in which the wireless industry, CTIA, sued the city of Berkeley for its cell phone right to know ordinance, which directed consumers to the fine print warnings of the manuals. Now, these filings by the FCC were key to the industry's favorable rulings in these two cases, but they never revealed that they had test data showing exceedances when the cell phone was tested close to the body. Now, the FCC also omitted the 2 mm tests from its own rulemaking procedures, where it had specifically asked, should we update how we do the test? And then all of these people entered in what they thought. Many said you need to update the test because we all use phones close to the body. The American Academy of Pediatrics filed several letters saying you need to update regulations and the test to better reflect real-world use of children with the cell phones close to kids' bodies and pregnant women. But the FCC concluded, even though it had this data, that even though some parties claim that RF exposure evaluation procedures for phones should require testing with zero spacing against the body, this is unnecessary. I mean, we were in court on this issue, and they never once mentioned these tests. Why did the FCC suppress these findings, and who is it protecting? Cell phone companies market cell phones as perfectly safe in the pocket, against the body, against the head. They have for years, and they still do. Now, one way to show safety is to put a cute baby in the advertisement.
In the hood with them guns, catch me out in the cave. Who you know I'm safe. I see them keep trying, professional imitate. They hit it loud, ooh, chitty chitty bang, chitty chitty bang, chitty chitty bang.
It's not just cell phones. There are all kinds of devices with fine print warning instructions that nobody ever reads, right? Video game consoles say you should be at least 20 centimeters from them. Now, I went to a friend's house where her son had 3 of these things, and they were all right by the bed. And he would, of course, sit right next to him while he played. The Amazon Echo and smart speakers have a fine print warning of 20 centimeters, and yet children are snuggling up to these devices.
Like a diamond in the sky, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are.
Here's one that comes in kid-friendly rainbow colors, again with a fine print warning of 20 centimeters. And these devices are marketed in rainbow colors because they are being marketed to children in partnership with other companies like sugar cereals such as Lucky Charms. This one says, can you catch Lucky? Just ask Alexa, open the story of Lucky Charms to see what happens. So how did we get here? Well, the Harvard report lays out how the US FCC exemplifies the concept of regulatory capture. Basically, the wolf is guarding the hen house. There's a revolving door between federal agencies and the industries that they are supposedly regulating. Now, the Harvard report is now 10 years old, and things have only gotten worse in the United States. So here is how the revolving door works. So here we have the former head of the Wireless Industry Association lobby firm, the CTIA, Tom Wheeler, who became FCC chair under President Obama. And during his tenure, he set the stage for the 5G rollout. After he retired from the federal government, he became the CEO of a strategy and development private investment group specializing in telecommunications. And this is FCC Chair Brendan Carr. Before he joined the FCC, he was a lawyer for Wiley Ryan Law Firm. He represented the wireless industry in many things, including suing the city of San Francisco in its cell phone right to know ordinance. And this is Meredith Atwell Baker, who worked for the CTIA wireless industry as Director of Congressional Affairs and served in many positions related to telecommunications in the U.S. government, then became FCC Commissioner in the U.S. government, and then took a position as CEO of the CTIA wireless industry. And now she's retiring, and who's going to take her place? Well, of course, it would be former FCC chair Ajit Pai. He had served as in-house counsel for Verizon Wireless. He then worked his way to be FCC commissioner, and he served as FCC chair for many years. And with Meredith Baker leaving her position as CEO of the wireless industry, he is going to take her place, and he is the new CEO of the CTIA wireless industry. And here is Meredith Baker as CEO of the CTIA, the Wireless Association, exemplifying the concept of greenwashing. She's wearing a butterfly dress at a wireless industry conference on how 5G is saving the climate. And the CTIA even came out with a report on how 5G is fighting climate change. This is greenwashing because, in fact, research and even industry white papers repeatedly document that the proliferation of 5G antennas, as well as the Internet of Things and all of these wireless communication networks and devices that we are being surrounded by, is increasing our energy consumption. Because while the energy use per unit of traffic is decreasing because of research trying to make technology more efficient, when you look at the overall energy use, there is an overall increase because of our exploding use of devices. It is swamping any energy efficiency gains of any one device. And also, 5G technology uses new kinds of antenna systems. They're far more powerful, they use a lot more energy, and that's why 5G has been called an energy hog. If you're interested in this, there is a University of Sussex Business School literature review on 5G, and that details how the ever-growing levels of data traffic are countering any efficiency improvements. Now, the revolving door between the wireless industry and government is an international reality. This is Thomas Barmuller. He was Austrian Federal Parliament member, then became managing director of the Austrian Wireless Industry Association, and now he's director of the Mobile and Wireless Forum for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. This is Robert Giz, twice elected Premier of Atlantic Prince Edward Island, now President and CEO of the Canadian Wireless Telecommunications Association. This is Vittorio Colau, who was the former CEO of Vodafone. He then became Italy's Minister for Technology, Innovation, and Digital Transition. And when he left, he joined the Verizon Board of Directors. So what about cell towers? They are everywhere. So when it comes to cell towers, there's a different kind of limit. It's an environmental limit. And the FCC and ICNIRP limits for that environmental ambient level of radio frequency are among the most lenient worldwide. Many other governments enforce stricter limits, especially when it comes to children's areas or homes. Countries like Italy and Switzerland take a precautionary approach. They have the ICNIRP limit, they drop it down a certain amount, whereas China and Russia actually have active RF radiation research programs to inform their limits. And there are levels in the United States that would simply be illegal in other countries because other countries do not allow this much radio frequency in the air from cell towers. There are many countries that have laws not allowing cell towers on school property, but not in the United States. We have cell towers being preferred to be on school property, and they are in neighborhoods, on apartment buildings. We have gigantic 5G poles going up in New York City, and let me tell you, community boards, many community boards are opposed to these gigantic 5G poles. And people are concerned not only because of the radiation, but because of how ugly they are and the decreased property value, and that they might fall over or things can fall off them. And there's actually a whole bunch of reasons why cell towers and big tall poles should not be in close proximity to where people live, work, and play.
Are 5G emissions safe? As 5G networks are deployed around the world, some concerns have been expressed about the safety of the technology. Could 5G hurt us or the environment? There are only two ways that 5G could be unsafe. That would be because of the frequencies the technology uses or the strength of the signal. 5G uses higher frequencies than 4G. When people worry about 5G, they usually think that higher frequencies mean unsafe radiation. Radiation is a scary word. And yes, 5G emits radiation. But a lot of things do. Light bulbs, for example. Radiation that can damage living tissue at the molecular level is called ionizing radiation. It includes ultraviolet light, X-rays, and gamma rays. Non-ionizing radiation that you get from standing under a light bulb does not cause damage. So yes, 5G frequencies are higher than 4G frequencies. But compared to ionizing radiation levels, there's still a very, very long way from the harmful range. Let's turn to intensity, or the strength of the signal. Microwave frequencies are too low to cause molecular damage. But if they are strong enough, they generate heat. That's how we get microwave ovens. So that mobile emissions don't heat up objects or organisms within their range, governments set strict standards well below the thermal effect level. The EU allows up to 10 watts per square meter. But actual tests show that wireless emissions are far below that. Right under a base station, 5G radiation is equivalent to that of a hairdryer. And 15 feet away, it's a tiny fraction of what you'd measure from a microwave oven. Earlier this year, the UK Office of Communications published the results of a countrywide study that looked at emissions from 5G mobile base stations. At most, they were 0.04% of the regulatory standard. So neither 5G's intensity nor frequency are a problem. And yet, some alarming studies have concluded that electromagnetic radiation can hurt plants or lab animals under certain conditions. Okay, but were these conditions in any way realistic? And were the results ever replicated? This is key. With science, it's important to look at the consensus. None of the world's largest health agencies have found any credible evidence that wireless mobile emissions are harmful. This includes the World Health Organization. In the US, the FDA reviewed the scientific literature published between 2008 and 2018 on mobile emission safety. It found no reasons for concern. ICNIRP, a global organization based in Germany, is entirely focused on radiation protection research. It recently completed a 7-year review of mobile wireless emissions, including 5G frequencies. ICNIRP confirmed that there is no reason to think mobile wireless emissions cause diseases. In the news, hardly a day goes by that one study or other says that something, coffee for example, is bad for you. The safety of mobile wireless technologies has been extensively researched over the past 40 years. 5G is new and operates in a different range, but it's the same as before as far as safety goes. So are 5G emissions safe? Absolutely. As safe as a light bulb.
There's a revolution on the way. It's the 5G revolution. Although some say this will be more like an experiment that will affect billions of people. 5G stands for 5th generation mobile services. The internet will be faster than ever. Downloading a high-definition movie will take mere seconds. By 2025, the European Commission is planning for all urban areas across the continent to have seamless 5G coverage. This will enable a new age in the Internet of Things. Smart driverless cars and smart hospitals, smart fridges, coffee makers, and even baby diapers. But what citizens are not told is that for this to happen, countless new antennas will be added. In our neighborhoods, our workplaces, even in our homes. Are mobile communications dangerous? The scientific community is divided. Some experts maintain they are safe, others have serious concerns. In 2011, the WHO classified electromagnetic fields associated with cell phones as possibly carcinogenic to humans. And studies published in 2018 showed that when rats were exposed to such fields, it increased their risk of certain types of cancer. Even among those who believe the technology is safe, many admit that more studies are needed. And for 5G, there are almost no studies. Telecom companies themselves have noted that electromagnetic signals may pose health risks. So why are the EU Commission and our governments turning a blind eye? They cite guidelines established by transnational scientific bodies. But Investigate Europe has found that these bodies are closed clubs. People with dissenting opinions are not invited in, and a significant number of the scientists involved have received funding from companies with vested interests in the 5G rollout. There is no risk-free society. Other things we consume are also bad for our health, from alcohol to junk food. But if you don't want a hamburger, you can simply avoid hamburgers. With 5G, there is no opt-out.
Now, in order to get all of these poles built throughout neighborhoods close to homes, the wireless industry made all of these false promises about 5G, that they needed it for self-driving cars, they needed it for this, they needed it for that. Well, actually, a lot of what they promised has not come true, and they're already on to 6G and 7G. But what they did accomplish is loosening our regulations in the United States so that even in residential areas, these wireless antennas can be erected. And here's an advertisement from several years ago saying that this is 5G built right. This is 5G built right in front of our homes. The companies are not hiding that they want to blanket communities with their signals. I mean, just look at the AT&T logo. And this is a study by some top European experts published in Environmental Research, which found what we know, which is that as these cell antennas are closer, that results in higher elevated levels where people are. 5G uses all the frequencies we've been using for years, as well as higher frequencies. And a European Parliament requested research report called The Health Impact of 5G was released in 2021. And it concluded that those commonly used radio frequencies that have been used for many years are probably carcinogenic for humans and clearly affect male fertility with possible adverse effects on the development of embryos, fetuses, and newborns.
Well, I'm Rodney Croft from the International Commission of Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, and I'm here at the 5G Summit to really talk about health and safety in relation to 5G. Our guidelines that have been around since '98 but are being updated and should come out in the next few weeks have put a lot of effort into ensuring that we've got an appropriate safety spelt out within the guidelines to ensure that 5G is safe. It's clear that the kind of exposures that will come out from 5G are very low. The effects on the body are going to be very minimal, and there really aren't any issues to do with health and safety concerning these. So I'm here to, I guess, explain a little bit more about that to the participants and take any questions that you might have in relation to 5G exposures here in Dubai. As the exposures really are very similar all around the world, there really shouldn't be any difference in terms of health and safety. All 5G exposures will be safe.
But the companies have known for a long time that there was scientific reports which documented harmful effects from non-heating levels. In fact, there's a 2000 report commissioned by T-Mobile, which is a wireless company here in the United States, which recommended an exposure limit at 1,000 times lower than FCC's current power density limit. This is Vodafone's 2020 report, where they actually list electromagnetic fields as a principal risk, along with climate change, Brexit, and the health pandemic. And they talk about how the risk can be broken down into areas. 1, failure to comply with IGNIRP limits. 2, the risk arising from campaigns or negative community sentiment towards location or installation of radio base stations, resulting in delays. And 3, changes in technology or the body of credible scientific evidence which may impact either of the 2 risks above. In short, companies warn shareholders of the risk, but not the people living near their infrastructure. Verizon Communications warns its shareholders in its 10-K filing, Our wireless business also faces personal injury and wrongful death lawsuits relating to alleged health effects of wireless phones or radio frequency transmitters. We may incur significant expenses in defending these lawsuits. In addition, we may be required to pay significant awards or settlements. Now, why aren't consumers being told? The companies even define non-ionizing electromagnetic fields as pollution in their own insurance that they provide to people for their cell phones. Now, there are many countries that provide public health information to keep the phone away from your head, especially for children. It's not a radical idea. We really should have straightforward, clear advice, and some countries actually do that.
Mobilni telefon je prijenosni elektronički uređaj za glasovnu, tekstualnu i slikovnu komunikaciju koju uspostavlja bežičnim spajanjem na mrežu baznih stanica. Štetna elektromagnetska polja najviše se emitiraju za vrijeme razgovora, dok se u stanju mirovanja i s povećanjem udaljenosti mobilnog uređaja značajno smanjuje izloženost korisnika. Izbjegavajte spavanje pored mobilnog uređaja. Dok spavate, ne stavljajte mobilni uređaj pod jastuk ili na noćni ormarić. Budite racionalni s istovremenom uporabom više uređaja. Odaberite uređaj s niskom specifičnom apsorbiranom snagom, takozvani SAR. Podatak o SAR-u možete pronaći u tehničkoj dokumentaciji svakog mobilnog uređaja. Šaljite tekstualne poruke umjesto da zovete mobitelom. Poštujte preporuke ograničene uporabe. Nosite uređaj što dalje od tijela u torbi ili ruksaku, umjesto u džepu hlača ili košulje. Mobilni uređaj najviše emitira elektromagnetska polja tijekom razgovora ili prijenosa podataka. Uvijek pričekajte prije nego prislonite telefon na uho, s obzirom da tijekom uspostave veze mobilni uređaj radi maksimalnom snagom. Ne razgovarajte na uređaj tijekom punjenja, uključite zvučnik ili rabite slušalice, te skratite vrijeme razgovora na mobilnom uređaju. Zbog uvođenja novih tehnologija primjenjuje se u zaštiti zdravlja načelo predostrožnosti, u skladu s kojim međunarodne nadležne organizacije provode preglede istraživanja i izdaju preporuke. Ovaj edukativni materijal dio je planiranog informiranja javnosti o utjecaju visokofrekventnih elektromagnetskih polja i neionizirajućeg zračenja baznih postaja javnih pokretnih komunikacijskih mreža na zdravlje ljudi, te je u skladu s predviđenom mjerom 10. strategije razvoja širokopojasnog pristupa u Republici Hrvatskoj u razdoblju od 2016. do 2020. godine. Promijenimo navike. Poštujte preventivne preporuke Ministarstva zdravstva.
Here is a PSA from French Polynesia.
Des ondes électromagnétiques sont émises par la plupart des appareils que nous utilisons dans la vie quotidienne. Pour s'en protéger efficacement et bien utiliser son mobile à la maison comme au travail, adoptons les bonnes pratiques.
And here's one from Cyprus.
Τα παιδιά μας εκτίθενται καθημερινά σε ένα ηλεκτρονικό νέφος, το οποίο δημιουργείται από την ακτινοβολία που εκπέμπουν τα κινητά τηλέφωνα, tablets και οι συνδέσεις μέσω Wi-Fi και άλλα παρόμοια. Η ακτινοβολία αυτή, σύμφωνα με τον Παγκόσμιο Οργανισμό Υγείας, είναι πιθανώς καρκινογόνα για τον άνθρωπο. Σύμφωνα με νεότερες έρευνες, η ακτινοβολία αυτή είναι πιθανό να προκαλέσει και άλλες σοβαρές επιδράσεις στην ανάπτυξη και λειτουργία του εγκεφάλου, του αναπαραγωγικού και άλλων συστημάτων του εμβρίου και του παιδιού, να προκαλέσει καταστροφή των νευρικών κυττάρων και του DNA, διάσπαση της προσοχής, διαταραχές στη μάθηση και άλλες νευρολογικές παθήσεις. Τα παιδιά είναι πολύ ευάλωτα. Μπορούμε όμως σε σημαντικό βαθμό να τα προφυλάξουμε από ένα σοβαρό κίνδυνο. Φτάνει να μάθουμε πώς.
ρωτάτε γιατί μας ακτινοβολείτε με τα Wi-Fi και τα κινητά σας τηλέφωνα. Έχουμε δικαίωμα στην υγεία και πρώτοι εσείς μπορείτε και πρέπει να μας προφυλάξετε.
Στη βάση της αρχής της προφύλαξης, το Συμβούλιο της Ευρώπης, το Ευρωκοινοβούλιο, επιστήμονες, ιατρικοί και εκπαιδευτικοί σύλλογοι στην Ευρώπη συμβουλεύουν ότι θα πρέπει να μειωθεί η έκθεση των παιδιών στην ακτινοβολία που εκπέμπουν τα κινητά τηλέφωνα, tablets και οι συνδέσεις μέσω Wi-Fi, ιδίως στο σπίτι και στο σχολείο.
Η έκθεση των παιδιών σε ηλεκτρονικό νέφος εγκυμονεί κινδύνους. Η χρήση των κινητών και συσκευών Wi-Fi από παιδιά μικρότερα των 14 ετών πρέπει να αποφεύγεται. Προφυλάξτε την υγεία και το μέλλον των παιδιών σας. Το ίδιο ισχύει και για την έγκυο. Οι έφηβοι ποτέ δεν βάζουν το κινητό στο υπνοδωμάτιο τους, στις τσέπες τους, στα μπράτσα ή κοντά στο στήθος τους. Πάντα χρησιμοποιούν hands-free και κρατούν το κινητό μακριά από το σώμα τους.
Αξιοποιώ την τεχνολογία σωστά. Γνωρίζω τους κινδύνους και δεν εξαρτώμαι από αυτή. Χρησιμοποιώ ενσύρματη σύνδεση για τον υπολογιστή του σπιτιού μου και ενεργοποιώ το Wi-Fi και τα δεδομένα κινητής τηλεφωνίας μόνο όταν χρειάζεται και ποτέ όταν τα παιδιά μου είναι κοντά. Δεν χρησιμοποιώ κινητό τηλέφωνο στο αυτοκίνητο όταν τα παιδιά μου βρίσκονται σε αυτό. Η έκθεση στην ακτινοβολία είναι πολύ μεγαλύτερη. Προστατεύω πάντα τα παιδιά μου.
Η Γαλλία ήδη με νόμο απαγόρευσε τη χρήση Wi-Fi σε παιδικούς σταθμούς και σε χώρους όπου φιλοξενούνται παιδιά κάτω των 3 χρόνων. Επιτρέπει ελάχιστη χρήση στα σχολεία κάτω από αυστηρούς περιορισμούς.
Στον νηπιαγωγείο, στο σχολείο και στο σπίτι περνάμε τουλάχιστον το 75% του χρόνου μας.
Απαιτούν ασφάλεια χωρίς ακτινοβολίες από Wi-Fi, κινητά και άλλες ασύρματες συνδέσεις. Η υγεία είναι δικαίωμα. Μην μας το στερείτε.
Δεν έχουμε το δικαίωμα να ρισκάρουμε την υγεία των παιδιών μας αναμένοντας παθητικά τους άλλους να κάνουν κάτι. Ας ξεχάσουμε τι είναι βολικό για μας και ας τους χαρίσουμε το καλύτερο δώρο, την υγεία τους, μετατρέποντας το σπίτι και το σχολείο σε όαση προστασίας.
Το σπίτι μου είναι όαση αγάπης και ασφάλειας. Σβήνω τα Wi-Fi και άλλες ασύρματες συνδέσεις όταν δεν χρησιμοποιούνται και κυρίως όταν τα παιδιά είναι στο σπίτι και τα κλείνω πάντοτε το βράδυ. Αξιοποιώ το κουμπάκι on-off. Είναι τόσο απλό να μειώσω το χρόνο αχρίαστης έκθεσης. Επενδύω στην υγεία των παιδιών μου μακροχρόνια.
Η ζωή και το μέλλον τους είναι στα δικά μας χέρια. Δώστε στα παιδιά ένα μοναδικό δώρο ζωής, την υγεία τους.
Now, the Health Security Agency actually does recommend discouraging excessive use by children, and they even list a few ways you can reduce exposure, like moving the phone away from the body, using a hands-free kit, and keeping calls short. In fact, back in 2002, Sir William Stewart, the former chief scientific advisor, issued a report called Mobile Phones and Health, which found that although wireless radiation hadn't been proven to cause adverse health effects, remember this is 2 decades ago, there is scientific evidence which suggests that there may be biological effects and gaps in knowledge to justify a precautionary approach. And the NHS websites actually had a lot of information. The NHS had a recommendation that children only use cell phones if necessary. And there was additional websites like Mobiles and Moms to Be, which summarize the research, reporting cell phone radiation linked to behavioral issues in children. But these pages are no longer on the NHS site. Even though the scientific evidence has continued to mount, the independent scientific evidence. So I did an interview a few years ago with Eileen O'Connor of the Radiation Research Trust. She's been working on this issue for decades, starting when a cell tower went up near her home in West Midlands, UK, and she developed breast cancer, as did some of her neighbors. She has since co-founded several charitable organizations, and one of the campaigns she worked on was educating the public. Along with other UK-based groups, they created these posters and awareness campaign. These posters were placed in public spaces such as bus depots and service stations. They talked about the impacts to the immune system, memory loss, sleep issues, reduced sperm count, and associations to brain tumors. However, these campaigns were repeatedly attacked by industry groups, leading to their removal every time. The Advertising Standards Agency and other bodies concluded that there was no evidence of harm, and they insisted that the posters be taken down, even though the groups had presented scientific research that had shown associations between exposure and these various effects. And they also had expert opinions supporting their claims, but they were told that they didn't have sufficient proof to allow these posters. This is from a 2011 campaign warning men about fertility risks from carrying the phone in their pockets. Once again, despite published research backing their claims, the posters were removed on the grounds of insufficient evidence.